13 years ago, a young nursing student stepped out of her Tennessee home on a bright spring morning and vanished into the woods behind her house without a sound. For 3 years, investigators chased shadows, neighbors searched tirelessly, and a family clung to hope against impossible odds. Then, in a series of shocking twists, the truth emerged, implicating people no one could have imagined, men who lived just across the county line. This story is not just about crime and justice. It's about faith, resilience, and a community's refusal to forget one of their own. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if stories like this grip you as much as they do us, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next mystery. On a quiet April morning in the small town of Parsons, Tennessee, a mystery began that would haunt a community for years. 20-year-old Holly Bobo, full of dreams and discipline as a nursing student, stepped out of her family's modest home, ready for another ordinary day of classes. But the calm of that morning shattered when her brother Clint saw her from the window, walking toward the carport beside a man dressed in camouflage. Believing it was her boyfriend, Clint brushed aside the unease in his gut, an assumption that would haunt him forever. Within minutes, Holly vanished into the thick woods behind their house, leaving behind nothing but silence and the first traces of a nightmare. What followed was not just a disappearance, but the unraveling of trust in a tight-knit community. For 3 agonizing years, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation searched tirelessly, chasing shadows while Holly's family clung to hope and faith. Hundreds of neighbors poured their hearts into the search, scouring fields and creeks, while local churches held vigils night after night. Yet, the woods held their secret. Then in the spring of 2014, the case that had weighed on every soul in Parsons exploded with shocking arrests. The men accused were not faceless strangers. They were locals, men the community had once known, perhaps even trusted. How could such evil have lived in plain sight, hiding behind familiar faces? The answer would take time to unfold, but to understand the weight of that April day, we have to step back into Holly's world. The air had been crisp with dew, the kind of Tennessee spring morning that stirs young hearts with the promise of summer. Holly's nursing books lay open on the kitchen counter, her notes meticulous, her uniform ready for the day ahead. Her parents, Dana and Karen Bobo, had already left for work, confident in their daughter's routine. The house carried the ordinary comforts of life. Coffee still warm in the pot, the low hum of morning news from the television. Yet, ordinary minutes can slip into tragedy in ways no one sees coming. From his bedroom window, Clint noticed again the man at Holly's side, leading her toward the tree line. At first, he dismissed the tension in her posture, thinking it must be her boyfriend Drew surprising her before class. Drew was known to wear hunting gear, after all. But something gnawed at Clint. Holly didn't look at ease. Moments later, both figures melted into the trees, and the stillness that followed wrapped around the house like a curse. Holly never returned. Minutes dragged into half an hour. Her car never started. Her phone remained on the kitchen counter. Clint called her again and again, each ring slicing deeper into dread. By the time he reached Drew and realized the boyfriend was nowhere near the house, fear turned into a physical weight pressing on his chest. Who had taken his sister? Where was she now? Desperate, Clint phoned his parents, stumbling over words no brother should ever have to speak. Dana and Karen dropped everything and raced home, their lives forever altered in the span of a few calls. By 8:42 that morning, Dana placed the call that changed everything, reporting Holly missing to 911. Routine questions from the dispatcher felt cruelly hollow against the reality setting in. Holly hadn't chosen to leave. She had been taken. Within hours, their quiet family property was transformed. Yellow crime scene tape sliced across the yard like a scar, sheriff's deputies and investigators swarming the once peaceful home. The sight was surreal. Neighbors, standing at the edge of the road, watching in disbelief as a family's ordinary morning dissolved into a nightmare. Investigators combed the carport, the house, the woods, finding her purse, her keys, her carefully laid out uniform. Everything pointed to a young woman who had intended to come home, not vanish. Word spread through Parsons like wildfire. Neighbors, friends, and church members mobilized almost instantly. Phone trees lit up, prayer circles formed, and volunteers prepared to search. In the face of unthinkable darkness, the people of Parsons showed the strength of a community that refused to abandon one of its own. From the very beginning, Holly's family and neighbors leaned on something stronger than fear: faith in one another. As dusk fell on that first terrible day, neighbors drifted into the Bobo yard until an impromptu prayer circle formed around Marie. Her face was streaked with tears, but her voice carried steady as she prayed for her daughter's safe return. The yellow crime scene tape flapped in the evening breeze, a chilling reminder that innocence had been stolen from their home. Yet the clasped hands and bowed heads gave back something precious: hope. By the next sunrise, Parsons was no longer just a grieving family's burden, but a mission for an entire town. Within 2 days, the story had spilled beyond Decatur County, reaching Nashville's evening news and drawing volunteers from all across Tennessee. The command post at New Hope Baptist Church became the beating heart of the search, with grid maps covering the walls, dividing endless woods and farmland into squares for teams to scour. Hundreds of volunteers, farmers on ATVs, hunters who knew every creek bed, church groups with food and water, poured their energy into the hunt. Helicopters buzzed above, dogs tracked scent trails that maddeningly evaporated at the roadside, and every lead brought a brief flicker of hope before fading under scrutiny. Dana and Marie, weary but steadfast, anchored themselves at the command post, offering photos, details of Holly's routines, even her fears, to every new group of searchers. Days blurred together, adrenaline giving way to exhaustion, yet no one wanted to be the first to quit. A week later, Parsons looked less like a quiet town and more like the center of a national spotlight. Satellite trucks lined the church parking lot, reporters delivering polished broadcasts against fields where neighbors still searched with mud-stained boots. The world now knew Holly's name, but with it came the weight of speculation. Internet forums spun wild theories, social media dissected every photo, and strangers far away debated her fate. For the Bobo family, each rumor was a fresh wound. Suggestions that Holly had run away, whispers that neighbors were suspects. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation fought to keep order, holding press conferences urging the public to bring facts, not rumors. Their calm professionalism offered rare stability in the chaos, even as the family's private grief was laid bare for strangers to judge. 2 weeks in, the Bobos faced their hardest choice yet: stepping out of their sheltered faith and into the glare of television cameras. For a family more comfortable with prayer than publicity, the thought was agonizing. But they knew one truth above all: if Holly's face disappeared from the news, so too might the chances of bringing her home. Inside New Hope Baptist Church, a banner painted by children became more than decoration. It became a sanctuary of hope. Holly's picture, surrounded by bright hearts and handwritten prayers, was a reminder that the community's faith still carried her name. Marie often stood before it during evening services, her voice steady even as her heart broke, drawing strength from the prayers of hundreds who refused to let her daughter's memory fade. Dana, on the other hand, found public speaking far more painful. Every interview forced him to peel open wounds that had barely begun to scar. Yet he spoke, because he believed that keeping Holly's dreams, her nursing ambitions, her kindness, her love for family, alive in people's hearts, might somehow bring her home. Clint carried a different torment. He replayed that April morning in his mind endlessly, haunted by the moment he saw his sister walk into the woods with a stranger. No reassurance could lift the survivor's guilt that pressed down on him daily. Through it all, the family's church rallied around them like a fortress, members bringing meals, answering phones, and protecting them from the crowds of reporters and well-meaning visitors. But when the cameras left and the house fell silent at night, Marie often slipped into Holly's room, surrounded by her daughter's belongings, and wept for the future that felt further away with every passing day. As summer settled over Parsons, the urgency of the search gave way to a slower, more agonizing form of grief. The large search parties thinned, though some loyal volunteers still combed remote fields and creeks on weekends. The media's gaze shifted elsewhere, leaving the family alone with silence. At the dinner table, Marie's nightly ritual of setting Holly's place became both heartbreaking and defiant. Friends urged her to stop, but she refused, believing that to put the plate away would mean surrendering hope. Dana buried himself in physical work until exhaustion dulled his thoughts, while Clint wrestled with anxiety and nightmares that refused to let him rest. Counseling sessions brought some comfort, but more often ended in tears. The town's support never disappeared, but as neighbors returned to their own lives, the Bobos felt the painful contrast between the world moving forward and their own lives frozen in April 2011. Investigators still worked the case, but updates came less often, their leads trickling instead of flooding. The years crept forward. 2012, 2013. Each holiday marked by Holly's absence, each anniversary reopening the wound. Yet Parsons found ways to honor her. Christmas ornaments with her photograph, shop windows adorned with her smile, and a scholarship in her name at the nursing program she had loved. These gestures lit small candles against the darkness. Meanwhile, investigators quietly re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined evidence, and chased tips from across the country. And Marie, refusing to drown in despair, found purpose by becoming an advocate for other families enduring the same nightmare. She testified before state lawmakers, pushing for better coordination and faster response times, determined that Holly's story would help others. The Bobos learned to live in the tension between sorrow and faith, finding joy in fleeting moments, but always feeling Holly's absence at the table. Still, they held on to the belief that truth would one day rise to the surface. And in February of 2014, nearly 3 years after Holly vanished, the phone call they had prayed for and feared finally came. The breakthrough came in February of 2014, when investigators finally secured an arrest warrant for Zachary Adams. His name was not unfamiliar in Parsons. Whispers about his violent past and ties to drugs had circulated for years. But until now, whispers were all they had. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had been quietly building their case, threading together evidence with the patience only a major investigation demands. When news broke that Adams was formally charged with especially aggravated kidnapping and aggravated murder, the shock was electric. For the Bobo family, the moment carried a storm of emotions. Relief that movement had finally come, terror that it confirmed their darkest fears, and the faint hope that justice might be possible at last. Parsons reeled. Some remembered Adams as troubled but harmless, others admitted they had long suspected his involvement. The return of media vans and satellite trucks brought the case roaring back into headlines, but this time, the energy was different. Progress had replaced paralysis. Still, the charges suggested what no one wanted to say aloud. Investigators believed Holly was gone. Knowing this truth tore at the family's hearts, but it also freed them from the endless torment of uncertainty. Then came another stunning blow. That spring, Adams's cousin Dylan and an associate named Jason Autry were also arrested. Suddenly, the horror expanded from one man's cruelty to a conspiracy involving multiple locals, men whose faces neighbors recognized from grocery stores, church gatherings, and ball games. Seeing their mugshots aligned side by side was shattering. It wasn't just a lone predator, it was a circle of evil hiding in plain sight. Dylan, the weaker cousin, was seen as someone who followed more than led. Autry carried the reputation of a small-time criminal and drug dealer, someone who lived on the edges of town life but was still part of its fabric. Their arrests peeled back the illusion of small-town innocence, revealing the darker undercurrents that can lurk behind familiar smiles. National media descended, turning Holly's tragedy into a cautionary tale for every community that thought such things could never happen there. For Marie, the arrests brought both hope and despair. Hope that investigators had strong evidence. Despair that more than one man had played a role in her daughter's suffering. Each court hearing became a trial of endurance, the family sitting quietly in the gallery, praying for strength as they listened to motions and arguments. They studied the men accused of shattering their lives, searching for any glimpse of humanity, any explanation, but found only coldness. By summer, as prosecutors began sharing evidence with defense teams, disturbing details began to leak. Investigators believed Holly had been held captive for hours before she was killed, enduring terror but fighting with courage until the very end. Even in fragments, the truth was unbearable. Yet those same fragments showed something extraordinary. Holly's dignity, her strength, her refusal to surrender who she was, even in her final moments. The town's outrage deepened, some residents calling for vengeance, though leaders urged patience and trust in the justice system. Parsons, once a place defined by neighborly trust, was now a community grappling with the darkest side of human nature, waiting for justice to answer what evil had tried to bury. As anger swelled across Tennessee, the accused men had to be moved to secure facilities for their own protection, a bitter irony considering what they had taken from Holly. Behind the scenes, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's years of tireless work came to light. Hundreds of interviews, thousands of tips, and advanced forensic testing had all been woven into a case strong enough to stand. For the Bobos, this dedication was both a comfort and a torment. They were grateful to know Holly's story had never been forgotten by investigators, yet the grim details of her final hours, what she had endured, cut deeper than any blade. The slow grind of legal procedure meant the family was forced to wait through hearings and motions, each delay frustrating but necessary to ensure the case was ironclad. Then, in September of 2014, the discovery they had both prayed for and dreaded arrived. Hunters stumbled upon human remains in a remote, wooded area near Holiday, Tennessee. A white forensic tent rose over the site, signaling the end of all hope. DNA confirmed what the Bobos already feared. Holly was gone. Whoever had left her there had chosen the spot carefully, far from roads, hidden from chance discovery. The collapse of Marie upon hearing the news was as devastating as the moment Holly first disappeared. After clinging to faith for so long, letting go was almost unbearable. The community, too, felt the dual weight of sorrow and relief. Though grief poured over Parsons, there was also comfort in knowing Holly would finally come home, that she could be laid to rest with dignity. Churches organized memorials, and the family planned a funeral that became one of the largest gatherings the town had ever seen. Holly's white casket, crowned with pink roses, stood before the sanctuary of New Hope Baptist Church, surrounded by flowers sent from across the state and beyond. Strangers came, compelled by the strength of a family who had endured unimaginable loss. Marie's words that day echoed through the sanctuary as she spoke of Holly's kindness, her dream of healing others, and the faith that sustained them. Hymns Holly had once sung herself, Amazing Grace and How Great Thou Art, rose to the rafters, carrying her memory upward. Pastor Steve Neal reminded the congregation that though Holly's life was cut short, her light could live on through acts of compassion and courage. At the graveside, the silence was so complete it felt sacred. As Clint dropped the first handful of dirt on his sister's casket, a promise kept at last. Closure of a kind had come, though the wound would never fully heal. From 2015 through 2016, prosecutors prepared relentlessly for trial, building a mountain of evidence and testimony. Their most startling advantage came when Jason Autry agreed to cooperate, offering an insider's account of the conspiracy that had stolen Holly's life. His words would prove both damning and disturbing, a window into evil no one in Parsons had imagined. Jason Autry's cooperation came at a heavy cost for everyone. His plea deal meant a lighter sentence, something the defense hammered on. Yet his testimony gave prosecutors the inside account they needed to strengthen their case. For the Bobos, it was a tormenting paradox, grateful for the truth, but repulsed by the idea of relying on a man who had helped steal Holly's life. As attorneys prepared for trial, witnesses were slowly coaxed forward, some still terrified of retribution, others finally brave enough to share what they had long buried. Behind closed doors, lawyers battled over motions, admissible evidence, and courtroom rules, knowing these technical fights could decide the fate of the case. For the family, the waiting was agonizing. They understood the system had to move carefully, but every delay meant reopening wounds that never truly closed. Finally, in the fall of 2017, over 6 years since Holly vanished, the trial began. The courtroom filled with townspeople, neighbors who had searched the woods, church members who had prayed through countless vigils, and strangers who had followed Holly's story from afar. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision, showing how Zachary Adams had orchestrated Holly's abduction with help from his cousin Dylan and Jason Autry. Then, Autry himself took the stand, recounting in chilling detail the conspiracy and Holly's final hours. His words left jurors visibly shaken, and the defense's attempts to dismiss him as a liar desperate for a deal fell flat against the weight of corroborating forensic evidence. DNA, phone records, and timelines that matched his story. Through it all, the Bobo family sat in the front row, Marie's quiet strength steadying everyone around her. Her composure, even during the darkest testimony, impressed all who watched. The defense tried to paint Adams as a scapegoat, but the argument found no footing. When the jury foreman rose, silence pressed over the courtroom. Then came the words, guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of especially aggravated kidnapping, guilty of aggravated sexual battery. The verdicts rolled like thunder through the room, bringing both tears of relief and grief. Zachary Adams sat cold and expressionless, showing no remorse, reinforcing what the community already believed, that this was a man devoid of conscience. At sentencing, Marie spoke directly to him, her words steady, but filled with the pain of a mother robbed of her child. Her voice carried not just her own grief, but the collective sorrow of an entire community. When Judge Don Ash sentenced Adams to life without parole plus 50 years, the gavel's echo was more than sound. It was justice at last. Holly would never come home, but her family's fight for truth had finally reached its end. The courtroom exhaled as one, a mix of sorrow, exhaustion, and a fragile sense of closure. After years of suffering, the Bobos had been given justice, even if it could never truly fill the empty chair at their table. The guilty verdict against Zachary Adams did not return Holly, but it ensured that her killer would never again walk free, a final act of justice that honored her memory. In the weeks that followed, the Bobo family faced the heavy weight of complex emotions. The fight that had consumed their lives for more than 6 years was over, and while headlines proclaimed justice served, the family now had to navigate the long road of grief without the structure of court dates and legal battles. Interviews after the trial gave them an unexpected gift, the chance to shift the narrative from Holly's tragic death to her vibrant life. They spoke of her laughter, her dream of nursing, her unwavering faith, and in doing so, reminded the world that Holly was more than a victim. The community, too, breathed a collective sigh of relief. Some had feared the case was too old or the evidence too fragile, but the verdict restored faith in the justice system and gave Parsons closure. Candlelight vigils glowed across the town. Faces etched by years of shared sorrow illuminated once more in unity. Yet for Marie, the end of the trial brought a strange emptiness. The pursuit of justice had defined her days, and now she needed new ways to carry Holly's legacy forward. The family began dreaming of a permanent memorial that would not only preserve Holly's memory, but also serve other families walking the same harrowing path. In 2018, another chapter closed with Dylan Adams' sentencing. His 15-year term reflected both his reduced role and his cooperation with authorities. For the Bobos, it was a bitter trade-off. His admission of guilt offered answers, but facing him in court reopened old wounds. His remorse seemed real to some, hollow to others, and the community itself was divided. Some outraged by the leniency, others accepting the compromise as a necessary step toward securing the conviction of the true ringleader. Prosecutors explained the difficult truth. Without Dylan's cooperation and Autry's testimony, Zachary Adams might never have been convicted. By 2020, Jason Autry's formal sentencing arrived, another milestone in the long pursuit of accountability. His testimony had been pivotal, yet his matter-of-fact recounting of Holly's final hours revealed a chilling lack of humanity. The courtroom felt different this time. Fewer cameras, fewer reporters, but for the family, the moment mattered deeply. Autry's cooperation sparked whispers of betrayal. Was he a coward saving himself, or a man who finally chose conscience, even if it came too late? For the Bobos, the answer was complicated. What remained clear was that every step of the legal process, however painful, carried them closer to the full truth of what had happened to their daughter. For many in Parsons, Jason, Autry's sentencing left a bitter aftertaste. Some saw him as a man who had finally come forward with the truth. Others saw only a coward who had participated in murder and then betrayed his partners to save himself. The judge's words captured the complexity. Yes, his cooperation had been invaluable, but he had still taken part in one of the most horrific crimes Tennessee had ever seen. For the Bobo family, Autry embodied contradiction. He was both the man whose testimony brought justice and the man who had stood by during Holly's final, agonizing hours. Living with that duality was painful beyond measure. In the months that followed, the town itself struggled to heal. Churches led services focused on forgiveness and the fragile hope that even in the darkest corners, light might find a way through. Pastor Steve Neal spoke candidly about faith under fire, asking the unanswerable. How could a loving God allow this? And how could a community that prided itself on Christian values harbor such cruelty? These questions had no simple answers, but asking them was part of the path forward. Some residents felt betrayed by neighbors who had known whispers and kept them buried. Others wondered what signs they had missed that might have changed everything. Support groups sprang up as people worked to process grief and fear. The realization that multiple men from their own community had conspired in this evil shattered the illusion of small-town safety. Children who had grown up under the shadow of Holly's case carried scars, too, absorbing the anxiety that lingered in every household, even if the details were softened. Through it all, community leaders chose to focus not on Holly's killers, but on Holly herself. They wanted her legacy to be built on kindness and courage, not the cruelty that had taken her life. By 2021, Marie transformed her grief into service. Fresh flowers on Holly's grave became her private ritual, but her public mission was helping other families facing the agony of missing loved ones. She spoke at conferences, testified before lawmakers, and counseled parents who were just beginning their nightmare journeys. Her strength astonished those who knew her story. She was reliving her own trauma so others would not feel alone. She argued for faster search protocols, better communication between agencies, and stronger support for families in crisis, lessons hard-earned through Holly's case. The work was exhausting, yet it gave her purpose. Dana lent his energy to search efforts for other missing persons, applying the hard-won experience of endless woods and fruitless leads. Clint, still marked by guilt and grief, began speaking to young men about recognizing danger and protecting those they loved. Together, the family turned pain into service, living the values Holly herself had embodied. On the 11th anniversary in 2022, Parsons held a memorial walk that traced a path through Holly's world, from her church to her high school to the nursing program where her dreams had bloomed. Hundreds walked, neighbors and strangers alike, honoring not just her death, but her life. Former classmates, now adults with families and careers, spoke of the futures Holly never had the chance to reach. Many had chosen nursing, inspired by her passion, carrying her dream forward in their own service. The walk also raised funds for the Holly Bobo Memorial Scholarship, helping new generations of students pursue nursing. Each recipient spoke of the responsibility to honor her memory, proving that even in tragedy, Holly's spirit continued to heal and to help through the lives of others. The memorial walk for Holly became more than a remembrance. It was proof of how far her story had reached. Those who had known her walked alongside strangers who had only read about her, bound together by grief, compassion, and the need to honor a life that had become larger than itself. The walk ended at the quiet cemetery where Holly rested, her grave adorned with flowers and tokens of love, a place that had become a pilgrimage site for anyone searching for meaning in tragedy. Reporters covering the event chose not to dwell on the horror of her murder, but instead on her legacy, echoing the community's conscious choice to define Holly by her kindness, her dreams, and her light. As years passed, the Bobo family carried their grief hand in hand with their faith, learning to weave loss into the fabric of their lives. Family photographs, always missing one beloved face, became reminders not only of absence but of the duty to live fully in her honor. Marie's advocacy gave her strength, Dana's care for Holly's grave and continued search efforts gave him purpose, and Clint, at last, began to let go of guilt, remembering his sister for her courage rather than the day she vanished. Their faith, though tested, remained unbroken, sustained by a belief in reunion and by the support of a church that had never let them walk alone. Therapy and counseling helped them understand that grief does not vanish. It transforms, becoming something that can live alongside hope and even joy. Neighbors, friends, and strangers who had once carried casseroles and prayers to their doorstep had become part of the story, too. A testament to the strength of community in the face of unthinkable loss. Holly's flame burned on in countless ways. in nursing students who chose her path of healing, in families who found courage through the Bobo's example, in volunteers who learned the power of showing up for one another. The courts had given justice, but her true legacy lived in these ripples of kindness. Ultimately, Holly's story was never just about a crime. It was about a family's refusal to surrender to despair, a town's determination to protect its own, and a young woman's impact that stretched far beyond her years. In the quiet glow of the memorial candle that never went out, her light remained, steady and eternal, proof that even in the darkest night, hope can endure. Holly Bobo's story reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, light can endure. Her life, though cut short, continues to inspire kindness, service, and courage in ways her killers could never destroy. Justice may have been served in court, but her true legacy lives on in the lives she touched and the hope she left behind. If Holly's story moved you, share this video to keep her memory alive and help others discover the lessons her family and community fought so hard to teach us. And if you believe, like we do, that stories of resilience must never be forgotten, subscribe and join us for the next chapter.